Good afternoon. Welcome to another intellectually exciting event as part of our 150-year celebrations and activities. We are very pleased and honored to be hosting our guest today, Professor Rashid Khalidi.
It's an honor to be speaking on the 150th anniversary of Özet, which I was telling your rector, I think may well be the finest university in the Middle East. So it is a great honor to be here. I will accept any invitation to come to Istanbul. There are very few cities that I would say that about. Now, I'm going to make a point that's particularly important for the Middle East, which is that this re-aggrandizement of the power of the executive, after they've been limited constitutionally, is particularly reinforced in wartime. I speak, I should say, parenthetically, from rich experience. I lived for many years in Beirut. I can tell you a great deal about how Lebanese democracy works. But I also lived for 16 years in one of the leading laboratories of corrupt one-party American democracy, Cook County and the great city of Chicago. During the time I was there, 1/3 of the members of the city council were not only indicted, they went to jail on charges of corruption. That is American democracy at its finest. That there's no question that the peoples of the Middle East have for the recent several decades, been forced to live under some of the ugliest authoritarian regimes around outside the former Soviet bloc. These included straightforward military dictatorships or one-party dictatorships in Syria or Iraq. These included or Algeria or Libya. These included absolute monarchies like Saudi Arabia, where nobody has any vote, any right. There actually is no citizenship. There's subjecthood and nationality. I think that the structures of the governments we all deal with throughout the Middle East were laid down in this period. They were fundamentally changed, and what we deal with today, if you deal with the Turkish bureaucracy, or my wife deals with the Egyptian bureaucracy, or I deal with the Lebanese bureaucracy, or the Palestinian bureaucracy, we are dealing with structures that are essentially created in this period that we're talking about. The first, in the first part of the 19th century to the first half of the 20th. It was the British. They were developing a constitutional process in 1882. The Khedive's powers had been severely limited by a consultative body. He was forced to accept a prime minister, and the British intervened. Same kind of thing was happening in Tunis. The same kind of thing then happened in Iran after the constitutional revolution. The role of European powers that were nominally constitutional in their aspirations, in their ideals, was invariably anti-constitutional, anti-democratic, pro-autocracy in favor of the narrowest level of freedoms to the populations. So, in many ways, the liberal order failed. By the end of the 50s, all over the Arab countries and in Turkey, you had military governments beginning, or the role of the military growing. Egypt, 1952, and so on and so forth. The irony of this is that even as these ultra-radicals, these jihadis, were moving towards a politics of violence and extremism and terrorism, most mainstream Islamists, most people who rejected the secular synthesis, including the Brotherhood in Egypt, including many political forces in Turkey and in other parts of the Middle East, including Hamas in Palestine, many others, moved towards an acceptance of constitutionalism, of democracy, of the rule of law in face of the unyielding nature of authoritarian regimes that dominate much of the Middle East. It is not an import from outside. These are indigenous forms that I'm talking about. The Muslim Brotherhood is not a foreign form. Liberalism in Lebanon is not a foreign form. I don't claim that I can predict the future. I've talked about history mainly. The history I've reviewed doesn't mean that these or other efforts to bring about constitutionalism and democracy will succeed. If the past is any indication of how the present may develop into the future, it appears that indigenous and external forces that do not favor democracy, that are autocratic or otherwise inclined, are at least as formidable in the Middle East as they have been at many times in the past century and a half.
I would like to have your comments on a Nahda party in Tunisia, whether you place them also in this modernizing synthesis.
I don't want to predict anything, but the news in the last few days is that the Nahda party has agreed with other forces in Tunisia on a transitional process.
So there is a discontent with the target that the latecomers of the middle stage are kind of, trying to aspire to, according to your talk, but there is a post that is already present. I mean, I'm sure, when you talk to these Islamic terrorists, they have a list of all those things that go wrong with democracy as it pans out in the, in the West, so to speak. So that must have, this must be fueling or affecting the dynamics that's happening in the Middle East. And I wonder whether you can talk a little bit about this.
Liberal regime requires, in the political democracy, not social democracy, political democracy requires legitimate elites solving problems.
Post-liberal era of autocracy and authoritarian regimes is critiqued in much the same way by the jihadis. They say, well, look at what we've had. We've had democracy, that's failed, liberalism. And now we've had generals and one-party regimes, and that's failed. But now internal affairs seem to take everybody's minds off of these foreign policy issues. So I'll stop there.
Well, thank you very
much.
And thank you for